In Coldwater Correctional Facility, a quiet black inmate was about to be disciplined. A routine cell check turned brutal when a senior guard dragged him into a blind corridor and began beating him without mercy. Darius Lattimore wasn't your typical inmate law clerk. For 5 years, he'd been a covert strategist, documenting systemic abuse and racial targeting from inside the prison walls. When Sergeant Ray Kincaid unleashed his rage, he had no idea he was triggering a coordinated resistance. Day's silent endurance and a single coded letter would set off a DOJ investigation and a prison-wide movement. What began as a beating became a rebellion. Coldwater would never be the same after one man turned pain into power. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The keys on Sergeant Ray Kincaid's belt jangled with each deliberate step down East Block's corridor. A sound inmates had learned meant trouble was coming. The sharp clank of metal against his thigh was a countdown. Kincaid time, they called it. Today, that countdown was for Darius Lattimore. 47392, Kincaid called out, his voice bouncing off concrete walls painted the color of dirty dishwater. He stood before the cell, shoulders squared, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. Step to the line. Darius Lattimore looked up from his law book, eyes steady but giving nothing away. He set the book down with careful precision, uncrossed his legs and moved to the yellow line with the measured calm that had earned him his nickname. Hands, Kincaid barked. Day extended his wrists, palms up. The ritual was familiar. The daily show of power. The reminder of who controlled what, bodies went where and when. He'd survived 5 years of this dance at Coldwater Correctional, Mississippi's for-profit fortress nestled among pine forests and poverty. Counts in 10, Kincaid said, eyes narrowing. You're due at commissary detail. Yes, sir, Day replied, voice low and even. I'll be ready. Something in his tone, not defiance exactly, more the absence of fear, made Kincaid's jaw tighten. He studied Day a moment longer, then moved on. But the look lingered between them. A promise. 3 hours later, as afternoon shadows lengthened, across the yard, CO Travis Red Harlan made his rounds through the chapel corridor. At 23, Red was the youngest guard on staff, his strawberry blonde hair and freckles making him look even younger. He idolized Kincaid, mimicking the older guard's swagger, hoping someday to command the same respect. He rounded the corner and froze. Kincaid had Day pinned against the wall, one forearm across his throat. The corridor was a blind spot. No, cameras here by design. Red knew he should keep walking. This was how order was maintained at Coldwater. This was normal, but what happened next wasn't normal. You think you're something special with your law books? Kincaid hissed, face inches from Day's. Think you can walk around here like you own the place? Day's eyes remained calm. No, sir. The first blow caught Day in the ribs, a quick, practiced jab. But Kincaid didn't stop there. The second hit, Day's kidney. The third was a closed fist to the jaw that made a sound Red would hear in his dreams for weeks after. Sir, Red called out, voice cracking, count starting. Kincaid ignored him, delivering another blow that doubled Day over. Then another, and another. Something had snapped in the sergeant. Some invisible line crossed. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't even punishment. This was something else entirely. Sir! Red tried again, louder this time. Day hadn't made a sound, not one. Even as blood from his split lip spattered the concrete floor, even as Kincaid's boot connected with his side, he remained silent. His eyes, though, they spoke volumes. They stayed fixed on Kincaid, unwavering, seeing something nobody else could. When Kincaid finally stopped, breathing hard, knuckles raw, Day lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Get medical, Kincaid ordered, straightening his uniform. Inmate attacked me. Resisted restraint. He glanced at Red, challenge in his eyes. Understand? Red swallowed hard. Yes, sir. Kincaid walked away, leaving Red alone with Day and the terrible knowledge of what he'd witnessed. The infirmary at Coldwater was understaffed and under-equipped, like everything else that didn't directly contribute to the profit margin. Day lay on a thin mattress, face swollen, ribs taped. The nurse had done what she could before being called away to another emergency. Nathaniel Prophet Briggs shuffled in, Bible clutched to his chest. At 73, he was the oldest inmate. At Coldwater, his dark skin paper-thin over gnarled hands, his white beard neatly trimmed despite 27 years behind bars. "They said you had another fall day," Prophet said quietly, pulling up a plastic chair. A guard stationed by the door smirked, but didn't interfere. Prophet's religious status granted him certain privileges, a fact he'd exploited for decades, to move information and offer counsel. Day's eyes fluttered open. "Must have tripped," he whispered through split lips. Prophet placed a weathered hand on Day's forehead, bowing his head as if in prayer. "The Lord sees what happens in darkness," he said, voice carrying just enough for the guard to hear his religious platitudes, then barely audible. "Mac's ready to move. Do I tell him to wait?" Day's fingers twitched against the sheet. "The file," he breathed. "It's time." Prophet nodded almost imperceptibly. "I'll pray for your healing, son," he said louder, then rose to leave. The old man paused at the door, turned back to look at Day one more time. Something flickered across his face. Not pity, but recognition. The beginning of something. The end of something else. In the yard the next day, Kincaid stood watching inmates mill about during recreation period, satisfaction evident in his posture. Dean Skinner Malloy, his shaved head gleaming in the Mississippi sun, sidled up to the fence nearby, seemingly examining the basketball court. "Heard you gave that uppity law clerk a lesson," Skinner said, without looking at Kincaid. As leader of Coldwater's Aryan Brotherhood, Skinner operated with implicit protection from certain guards, an unspoken alliance that kept racial tensions calibrated at a useful simmer. Kincaid didn't respond directly. "Your boys keeping things in line on the west side?" "Always do," Skinner said, a thin smile stretching across his face. "Appreciate someone keeping the natural order around here. Becoming too comfortable. Some of them." Kincaid nodded slightly, accepting the praise. But something nagged at him, the way Day had looked at him during the beating, not with hate or fear, but with something worse. Patience. Lieutenant Carol Avery sat at her desk, reviewing incident reports from the previous day. As one of the few female officers at Coldwater and the recent appointee to Internal Affairs Liaison, she was used to scrutinizing details others missed. The report on Darius Lattimore's aggressive behavior and subsequent restraint didn't add, the injuries documented by medical, 3 broken ribs, kidney contusion, concussion, facial fractures, were inconsistent with standard restraint procedures, and the location, the chapel corridor, was conveniently one of the only spots without camera coverage. Avery made a note on her pad, then tucked it into her desk drawer. She'd been at Coldwater just long enough to know how things worked, and just recently enough to remember how things should work. After a moment's hesitation, she drafted a brief memo regarding the surveillance blind spot in the chapel corridor, recommending immediate camera installation for officer safety. She knew it would be ignored, but the paper trail mattered. Something had happened in that corridor, something beyond the usual Coldwater discipline, and judging by the whispers already spreading through the cell blocks, the inmates knew it too. Red couldn't sleep that night. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Day's face, blood pooling beneath his head. He saw Kincaid's eyes, cold and distant, like he'd gone somewhere else while his fists kept working. Red had joined Coldwater straight out of high school, following his father's advice, good benefits, stable work. He'd looked up to Kincaid from day one, the swagger, the respect he commanded, the easy certainty of his authority. Now, staring at his ceiling, Red wondered what he'd actually witnessed in that corridor. Not discipline, not control, something else. something with consequences still to come. In the darkness of solitary confinement, Day lay on his bunk, each breath a careful negotiation with pain. His face was a topographical map of Kincaid's rage, but his mind remained clear, focused. 5 years he'd waited, watching, documenting. 5 years of building networks, gaining trust, collecting evidence of Coldwater's systematic abuses. The beating had been brutal, yes, but it was also an opportunity, the final piece he needed. Everything has its purpose, Prophet had told him once. Even suffering if you're awake enough to use it. Day closed his eyes, feeling the prison breathe around him, felt its rhythms and fault lines, its corruption and its possibilities. Kincaid thought he'd taught a lesson today. He had no idea what lessons were really being learned or by whom. In the cells around him, whispers traveled like electricity through water. The story grew with each telling. Not just another beating, but a symbol, a spark. Day Lattimore. The man who didn't break. The man who looked Kincaid in the eye and saw him for what he was. The man who had a plan. The dam of silence was cracking, and through those cracks, truth was beginning to flow. The fluorescent lights in Coldwater's infirmary buzzed like trapped insects. Day lay still on the thin mattress, counting each buzz, a meditation that helped manage the pain radiating from his ribs. 3 days had passed since Kincaid's boots had left their imprint on his body, and each breath remained a careful negotiation. Officer Mendez stood by the door, thumbing through a hunting magazine, casting occasional bored glances Day's way. The guard rotation had been constant, never the same officer for more than 4 hours. Unusual protocol for a simple restraint incident. Day noted this detail silently, adding it to his mental ledger. When the infirmary door swung open, Mendez straightened his posture. Lieutenant Carol Avery stepped in, clipboard in hand, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp features. "I need to speak with the patient," she said, her tone professional, leaving no room for argument. Mendez hesitated. "Captain said no interviews without—" "This is medical follow-up," Avery cut him off. "Not an interview. And I outrank you, Officer Mendez." After a moment's calculation, Mendez nodded and stepped outside. Avery approached Day's bed, pulling up a plastic chair. She waited until the door closed before speaking. "Mr. Lattimore, I'm reviewing the incident from Tuesday. There are some inconsistencies in the reports." Day studied her face. In 5 years at Coldwater, he'd learned to read intent in the smallest muscle movements. Avery's eyes held something he rarely saw from staff. Doubt. "Not sure I can help, Lieutenant," he said carefully. "Fell pretty hard. Memory's fuzzy. You have 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and your kidney function is compromised," she said flatly. "The official report states you became aggressive during a routine check and had to be restrained. Is that what happened?" Day remained silent, his steady gaze an answer in itself. Avery lowered her voice. "The nurse who treated you initially filed observations that don't match Sergeant Kincaid's account. That nurse has since amended her statement. Do you know why she might do that?" "Can't speak to anybody else's choices, ma'am." Avery's pen tapped against her clipboard once, twice. "There should have been camera footage from East Block that day. Somehow it was erased during routine server maintenance." Her eyes remained fixed on his. "Convenient timing." Day shifted slightly, pain flashing across his face. "This place runs on convenience." Something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding about how Coldwater operated. Avery stood, straightening her uniform. "Rest up, Lattimore. Medical says you'll be cleared to return to your cell tomorrow." As she reached the door, Day spoke again. "Lieutenant, falling hurts less when you see it coming." Avery paused, her back to him, then nodded once before leaving. The administrative offices of Coldwater occupied the only section of the prison with decent air conditioning and windows that actually opened. Warden Harold Munsley's corner office featured an oak desk, Mississippi state flag, and a wall of framed awards for excellence in corrections management, corporate speak for keeping costs down and profits up. At 58, Munsley carried his weight like a weapon, imposing, deliberate, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit a subtle reminder to his staff that he wasn't just a civil servant, but an executive. "Lieutenant Avery," he greeted, her not looking up from his computer. "I understand you've been conducting interviews about the Lattimore incident." Avery stood at attention, her posture military precise. "Yes, sir. Standard procedure for any serious medical event." Munsley gestured for her to sit. "Carol, may I call you Carol? You've been at Coldwater, what, 14 months now? Coming from state facilities in Alabama, if I recall." "Yes, sir. 17 months next week." "And in that time, you've shown admirable diligence." The pause conveyed everything the word didn't. "But I worry you're allocating resources to a non-issue. Lattimore has a history of causing trouble." "His record shows no violent incidents, sir." Munsley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not all trouble leaves marks, Lieutenant. The kind of trouble Lattimore specializes in is more insidious. He's what we call an influencer, gives other inmates ideas." He swiveled his monitor toward her, displaying Day's file. "Former paralegal. Educates himself on prison regulations. Files grievances. Helps others do the same. Creates administrative headaches." Each phrase delivered like the rap of a gavel. "With respect, sir, that's his right." "Rights," Munsley chuckled, leaning back. "Let's focus on our priorities here. Coldwater has maintained an exemplary safety record, because we address problems before they become incidents. Sergeant Kincaid is one of our most experienced officers. If he assessed Lattimore as a threat requiring restraint, I trust his judgment." The implication hung in the air. "And you should too." "Now," he continued, his tone shifting to something warmer, practiced, "I've been reviewing your file. Your advancement has been impressive. Corrections sergeant by 26, lieutenant by 30. You have a bright future, Carol. I'd hate to see it derailed by misplaced concerns over routine discipline." Avery felt the weight of his words, the implicit choice being offered. "Our focus right now," Munsley concluded, "should be on internal morale. The incident is closed. My suggestion is that you redirect your considerable talents toward more productive avenues." "Understood, sir," Avery said, her face revealing nothing. In the law library, Jerome Mac Dunson shelved books with barely contained fury, his muscular frame tense as a coiled spring. At 42, with 20 years into a life sentence, Mac had long ago abandoned hope of freedom. What remained was a fierce loyalty to the few he trusted, and Day headed that short list. Prophet Briggs sat at a table nearby, Bible open before him, his presence ensuring they could speak without raising suspicion. 3 days, Mac muttered, sliding a legal volume into place with unnecessary force. 3 damn days and we ain't done nothing. Word spreading that we soft. Prophet turned a page. "Patience isn't weakness, son. Tell that to the brothers. In C Block. They're looking for leadership for action." Mac's voice dropped lower. "We got 20 men ready to move. Could shut down the cafeteria tomorrow. Send a message." "And then what?" Prophet asked. "They lock down the facility. Restrict. Privileges beat more of our people. Is that the victory you want?" Mac slammed another book into place. "Better than doing nothing while they stomp us." "Day's not doing nothing," Prophet said calmly. "He's playing chess while Kincaid plays checkers." The library door opened, and several inmates from D Block entered. Mac recognized faces from their secret meeting the previous night where he'd rallied support for a coordinated protest. The men gave subtle nods of acknowledgement. Once they were out of earshot, Prophet continued. "Day sent the letter yesterday. Used his legal mail privilege." "To who?" "Someone on the outside. A lawyer with DOJ connections." Prophet's eyes, roomy with age but sharp with intelligence, fixed on Mac. "This isn't just about one beating. Day's been documenting everything for years. The bonus system for compliance interventions, how they target our brothers disproportionately, the deals with Skinner's crew. This could bring the whole system down." Mac's expression remained, skeptical. Systems designed not to fall, old man. Been that way since they brought our ancestors here in chains. Every system has weaknesses, Prophet replied. Pressure points. Days found cold waters. Mac leaned against the bookshelf, considering. The men won't wait forever. They need something to believe in. Then give them that, Prophet said. Not just anger. Purpose. Days coming back to General. Population tomorrow. We need eyes on him at all times, protection. And we need to spread the word quietly that something's in motion. And if nothing comes of this letter, if the outside world don't care like usual, Prophet closed his Bible, then we try something else. But we do it Day's way. Smart. Patient. He rose slowly, joints protesting. Meeting tonight. Storage. Room behind the kitchen. 11 guards on shift, 3 in rotation through East Block. You'll have 7 minutes. Mac shook his head, a reluctant smile forming. How's an old man like you know the guard rotations? The Lord provides, Prophet replied with a wink. And I've been watching these walls longer than you've been alive. Day sat up slowly on his infirmary bed, every movement a negotiation with pain. When the night nurse stepped away, he carefully retrieved a small pencil stub hidden in the seam of his mattress. From under his pillow he withdrew a lined piece of paper, ostensibly a commissary request form. In the dim light he began to write in neat, precise handwriting. Dear Mr. Rivera, following up on our previous correspondence regarding library access, I've encountered some administrative resistance that I believe falls under the scope of our discussion. The resource limitations mentioned previously have intensified. On Tuesday, May 17th, a demonstration of these limitations resulted in 3 broken shelves, sections 42-45, damage to reference materials, restricted access to legal terminals. This pattern of resource denial particularly affects E-Block researchers with melanin-rich backgrounds. Previous documentation enclosed contains 27 similar incidents from January to present. Timestamps and witness statements included. Time sensitivity has increased. External review would be appreciated before maintenance further damages our archives. Respectfully, D. Lattimore, the member 47392. Day reread the letter carefully. The coded message would be clear enough to Rivera, the Department of Justice civil rights attorney who had quietly been building a case about Coldwater for months. The evidence Day had been meticulously gathering, hidden in plain sight among legitimate legal filings, would now have the trigger event needed to escalate federal intervention. He folded the paper precisely, slipped it into an envelope marked Legal Correspondence, Privileged, and tucked it under his pillow just as the nurse returned. Despite his injuries, a calm certainty settled over him. The pieces were in motion. Red Harlan hunched over his dinner in the staff cafeteria, pushing meatloaf around his plate without appetite. 3 tables away, Kincaid held court with several other guards laughing loudly at something. Red kept his eyes down. Mind if I join you? Red looked up to find Lieutenant Avery standing with her tray. He nodded, thrown off by the unusual request. Officers rarely mixed ranks during meals. Avery sat, her movements efficient. You were on duty in East Block Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't a question. Red swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. And you submitted the supporting incident report for Sergeant Kincaid's intervention with inmate Lattimore. Red pushed his tray away. Just followed procedure. Avery took a bite of her food, chewed deliberately before responding. The chapel corridor where the incident occurred, you're familiar with it? Yes, ma'am. And would you say that area is well monitored? Secure? Red could feel Kincaid's eyes on him from across the room. It's like any other corridor, ma'am. Except without camera coverage, Avery said mildly. An oversight I've recommended correcting. Red said nothing, his face flushing. Avery's voice dropped. Officer Harlan, I've reviewed your file. Excellent academy scores. Clean record. On track for advancement. She met his eyes directly. I'd hate to see that potential compromised by misplaced loyalty. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. Avery stood, taking her tray. If you decide you have anything to add to your report, my door is open. No appointment necessary." As she walked away, Red felt a cold sweat break out across his back. Across the room, Kincaid was still watching him, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Kincaid sat alone in his truck in the Coldwater staff parking lot, the engine idling, radio playing, some country song about freedom and open roads that struck him as ironic. His shift had ended 30 minutes ago, but he hadn't started the drive home yet. Something felt off. Wrong. The way Red had been avoiding him. The whispers that stopped when he entered a room. The way inmates were watching him, not with the usual fear, but with something else, something calculating. His mind kept returning to Lattimore's eyes during the beating. The calm in them, like he'd been expecting it, wanting it almost. Kincaid rubbed his face, exhaustion seeping into his bones. 17 years he'd worked at Coldwater. 17 years of maintaining order, of being respected, feared. The system worked because he made it work. He reached for his lunchbox on the passenger seat and froze. A folded piece of paper lay on top that hadn't been there when he'd left it in his locker. Slowly, he opened it. 5 words, block letters. "You beat the wrong one." Kincaid's heart hammered against his ribs. He crumpled the paper, scanned the parking lot with sudden paranoia. Empty. He started the truck with a shaking hand and peeled out of the lot, gravel spitting from beneath his tires. All the way home, he checked his rearview mirror, the phantom weight of those 5 words heavy in his pocket. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The night was thick with humidity as Day was wheeled back to his cell, his ribcage bound, tight with bandages. The cell block was quiet, too quiet, with the unnatural stillness that meant everyone was awake, listening. As the guards left, locking his door with a metallic finality, Day carefully eased himself onto his bunk. The pain was manageable now, a constant companion rather than an overwhelming force. In the cell next to his, a soft tapping began against the wall. Morse code, slightly modified, a system Day had taught to select inmates over the years. WELCOME. BACK. Day smiled slightly, tapped his response. GOODTOBEHOME. More tapping followed from different directions, messages of support, of solidarity. The network was active, expanding. What had begun as a few trusted confidants had grown into something larger, something with momentum. Day closed his eyes, listening to the secret language of Coldwater at night, the whispers, the taps, the occasional cough that signaled a guard approaching. Information flowed like an underground river beneath the concrete and steel. The letter was on its way to Rivera. Mac was organizing. Avery was asking questions. And Kincaid was beginning to feel the first tremors of doubt. Day's body was broken, but his resolve had never been stronger. The wheels were turning. The truth was moving toward the light, and Coldwater's foundations had begun to crack. The law library at Coldwater was hardly more than a closet with 3 metal desks and shelves of outdated legal texts. But for Day, recently returned to general population, it had become command central. His bruised face and careful movements had transformed him from a quiet presence into something else entirely, a symbol. Inmates who had previously ignored him now nodded in acknowledgement as he passed. Day sat with his back to the wall, sliding a manila folder across the table to Terrell Jenkins, a young inmate serving 5 years for possession. "Legal precedence for your appeal," Day said, loud enough for the supervising guard to hear. Jenkins opened the folder, finding instead several photocopied pages of meticulously documented incidents, dates, times, officers involved, and injuries sustained during compliance interventions. All involving black inmates, all showing the same pattern. "This real?" Jenkins whispered, eyes widening. "Every word," Day replied. "Pass it on. East Block only. Trusted people." Jenkins nodded, closing the folder. Information was currency at Coldwater, and Day had just made him rich. Warden Munsley's face was an alarming shade of red as he slammed a letter onto his desk where Kincaid sat stiffly. "The fucking Department of Justice," Munsley hissed. "They've acknowledged receipt of substantive allegations regarding civil rights violations at Coldwater Correctional Facility. Care to guess what those might include, Sergeant?" Kincaid's collar felt suddenly tight. "Sir, Save it," Munsley cut him off. "I don't need details. I need this contained. Regional. Management is breathing down my neck. If this reaches the press, Correctional Service Partners loses the state contract, which means we all lose our jobs." Kincaid shifted uncomfortably. "You think Lattimore is behind this?" "Who else? He's the only one with the connections and knowledge to pull something like this off." Munsley paced behind his desk. "The hell were you thinking, Ray? In the chapel corridor of all places?" He was becoming problematic, needed a reminder. "Well, your reminder might cost us everything." Munsley stopped pacing. "Listen carefully. This DOJ letter is just the beginning. They'll send investigators, interview staff, review footage. We need to get ahead of it." "What do you want me to do?" "Control Lattimore. I don't care how. Just do it quietly. If he's passing information, shut it down. If he's organizing, break it up." Munsley lowered his voice. "The board expects this handled discreetly. No more incidents that require medical attention, understood? But if Lattimore becomes the focus of unrest, we'll need to transfer him, for safety reasons." Kincaid understood the implication. Transfer to certain facilities was equivalent to a death sentence for high-profile inmates. "And Ray," Munsley added, "if this goes south, it won't be my name in the headlines." In the yard, Day sat on a bench alongside Prophet, watching a basketball game with seeming disinterest. In reality, they were observing the yard's shifting dynamics. "Rivera confirmed receipt," Day said quietly. "Investigation's been authorized." Prophet nodded slightly. "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3 before they show up. We need to keep things steady until then." Across the yard, Skinner and his lieutenants huddled near the weight pile, occasionally glancing their way. Day had noticed Skinner approaching certain black inmates recently, those on the fringes, vulnerable, looking for protection. "He's recruiting," Day observed. "Playing both sides," Prophet agreed. "Creating insurance for himself." They fell silent as Mac approached, tension evident in his stride. "We got a problem," Mac said, sitting beside them. "D-block crews are getting restless. Marcus's boys think we should move now, make Kincaid pay while he's on edge." "That's exactly what they want," Day replied. "An excuse for a lockdown, to isolate us, break communication." Mac lowered his voice. "But we're organized now. Over 50 brothers ready to act, plus some of the Latinos from C-Block. The system wants violence," Prophet interjected. "It's designed to absorb it, use it. They've got the guns, the restraints, the isolation cells." Day winced as he shifted position, his ribs still tender. "Tell Marcus to hold his people steady. The DOJ is coming. We need to be unified when they do." A commotion erupted on the basketball court. 2 black inmates, one from D Block, one from East Block, were suddenly pushing each other, surrounded by their respective crews. "What the hell?" Max stood up. "Those are both our people." Day watched as guards moved toward the altercation. Behind them, Skinner smiled faintly. "Not a coincidence," Day said. "Someone's stirring the pot." Lieutenant Avery found Red Harlan in the staff locker room, changing for his shift. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. Red tensed. "I'm due on shift in 5. "This won't wait," Avery interrupted. "The DOJ has opened an inquiry into Coldwater. They'll be sending investigators." The color drained from Red's face. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you witnessed what happened to Lattimore, and you filed a false report." Red glanced around nervously. "I reported what I saw." "No," Avery stepped closer. "You reported what Kincaid told you to report. There's a difference. You don't understand how things work here." "I understand perfectly. I worked corrections in Alabama state prisons for 8 years before coming here. I've seen the unwritten rules. Her voice softened slightly. I've also seen what happens to officers who take the fall for others' mistakes. Red closed his locker slowly. What do you want from me? The truth. What really happened in that corridor? After a long pause, Red's shoulders slumped. Kincaid went too far. It wasn't restraint, it was, I've never seen him like that. But I can't testify. I just can't. Avery studied him. Think carefully about your next steps, Officer Harlan. When federal investigators start asking questions, loyalty to Kincaid won't protect you. In the cafeteria, a new hierarchy was emerging. Inmates who had received copies of Day's documentation sat together, their quiet conversations punctuated by meaningful glances toward the guards. Knowledge had created solidarity, turned isolated grievances into recognized patterns. Kincaid noticed the shift immediately, the way conversations stopped when he passed, the barely concealed contempt in eyes that once showed fear. Even worse was the behavior of other guards, who had begun giving him a wider berth, as if his troubles might be contagious. We need to talk, Captain Mosley said, pulling Kincaid aside. The men are asking questions. About Lattimore, about the DOJ letter. Tell them to focus on their jobs, Kincaid growled. It's not that simple. There are rumors you're being investigated internally. Mosley lowered his voice. Look, Ray, we've worked together 15 years, but I've got a pension to think about. The implicit message was clear. Don't expect blind loyalty. Kincaid watched Day across the cafeteria, calmly eating while inmates rotated through the seats around him. Getting instructions, Kincaid realized. Building something. The note in his truck hadn't been an idle threat. It had been a promise. Skinner found his opportunity during evening recreation. As black inmates from rival blocks continued their tense standoff from the basketball incident, he approached a guard he knew was susceptible to suggestion. Might want to watch Johnson and his crew, Skinner muttered. Heard they're planning something for tomorrow. Guards might get caught in the middle. The guard nodded, grateful for the tip. Skinner moved on, approaching a nervous-looking Latino inmate next. Diego, right? Noticed you've been having trouble with Washington's boys. My people can make that problem disappear. What's it cost? Diego asked warily. Skinner smiled. Just information, eyes and ears in C block. By the time recreation ended, Skinner had planted seeds of discord in 3 different factions and secured himself informants in 2 blocks. Chaos was coming to Coldwater and he intended to profit from it. Day lay on his bunk that night, listening to the prison breathe around him. The tap, tap, tap of messages traveled through the walls. Updates, warnings, encouragement. His network was growing stronger. Information flowing more freely. A guard appeared at his cell, performing a random check for the 3rd time that shift. Everything in order, Lattimore? The guard's tone was mocking. Yes, sir, Day replied, evenly. Just reading. As the guard moved on, Day returned to the legal brief he'd been studying, not for its content, but for the note hidden between its pages, passed to him during dinner. DOJ confirmed. Rivera sending 2 investigators next week. Warden called emergency staff meeting. Kay increasingly isolated. Day allowed himself a small smile. For 5 years he'd collected evidence, built networks, prepared for this moment. The sigh, beating had been the catalyst, the final evidence needed. Now the machinery of justice, and slow and imperfect though it was, had begun to turn. In the cell next to his, an inmate tapped out a question. What next? Day tapped back. We wait. We watch. We stand together. Kincaid found a sealed envelope in his locker the next morning. Inside was a memo from Warden Munsley, effective immediately. Reassignment to night shift, East Block. Primary responsibility, monitoring inmate Lattimore and associates. Contain situation by any necessary means. Reminder, no further documentable incidents. Clean this up, or we'll all face consequences. The implication was clear. Solve the Lattimore problem or become the scapegoat. The prison administration was already distancing itself, creating plausible deniability. Kincaid crumpled the memo, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. The walls of Coldwater, once his domain, now seemed to be closing in. For the first time in 17 years, he felt like the one being watched, being judged, being hunted. He thought again of Day's eyes during the beating, that unsettling calm, that patience. Like he'd been waiting for Kincaid's fists, collecting them as ammunition for a larger battle. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Day hadn't been the victim that day in the chapel corridor. Kincaid had. Full shakedown. On your feet. Hands against the wall. The command echoed through East Block at 4:30 a.m., followed by the synchronized slam of cell doors being thrown open. Guards in tactical gear moved with practiced efficiency, flashlights cutting through darkness as inmates were dragged from sleep. Kincaid stood at the center of the chaos, barking orders. Every cell, every crack, every seam in the goddamn walls, I want everything. Day stood calmly by his bunk as two guards tore through his meager possessions. Legal papers scattered across the floor. Books were gutted, his mattress was sliced open. Looking for something specific, Sergeant? Day asked quietly. Kincaid stepped into the cell, his face inches from Day's. I know what you're doing, he whispered. It stops now. Day's expression remained neutral. Just serving my time, sir. 3 cells down, Mac wasn't taking the intrusion as stoically. When a guard discovered a sharpened toothbrush under his sink, Mac exploded. That ain't mine. You planted that. He lunged forward, stopping just short of physical contact. It was all the excuse they needed. 4 guards slammed him to the ground, zip-tied his wrists and dragged him away toward solitary. His shouts echoed down the corridor. Day, this is what I was talking about. They playing dirty now. Kincaid watched with grim satisfaction. One problem neutralized. When the shakedown reached Prophet's cell, they found only religious texts and a neatly made bunk. The old man sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, seemingly oblivious to the commotion. Where is it, old man? Kincaid demanded. Prophet's eyes opened slowly. Where is what, son? The paperwork. Lattimore's files. I keep no earthly possessions beyond the word of God, Prophet replied, unperturbed. Frustration mounting, Kincaid moved to the next cell. By sunrise, East Block had been thoroughly ransacked, and they'd found nothing. The chapel was unusually crowded that afternoon. Inmates who rarely attended services sat in silent rows as Prophet stood at the pulpit, his frail frame somehow commanding in the dusty light filtering through barred windows. The book of Daniel tells us of 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were thrown into a fiery furnace for refusing to bow. Prophet began, his voice carrying to the back row where several guards stood watching. The king made the fire 7 times hotter, thinking it would break them. His eyes swept across the congregation, lingering briefly on Day. But the fire that was meant to destroy them only revealed their true strength. And in that furnace, they were not alone. Prophet's voice rose slightly. The lesson isn't just about faith. It's about standing upright when the powerful demand you kneel. It's about recognizing that even in the hottest fire, you are not alone. From his position by the door, Red watched the inmates lean forward, hunger for meaning evident in their posture. He noticed how Prophet's words, seemingly innocuous, carried coded significance. The sermon continued, dancing between biblical allegory and thinly veiled encouragement to resistance. When Prophet concluded, something unusual happened. Instead of the typical muttered amens, the chapel fell into complete silence. Then, in unison, every inmate stood, a silent demonstration of unity that made Red's skin prickle with unease. In the staff break room, the atmosphere was tense. Guards who normally joked and complained about inmates were unusually quiet, stealing glances at Kincaid as he poured a cup of coffee. Productive morning, Captain Mosley commented, attempting normalcy. Didn't find a damn thing, Kincaid muttered. They're hiding it somewhere. Maybe there's nothing to find, suggested Officer Dawson, a recent transfer. Kincaid's head snapped up. What's that supposed to mean? Dawson shrugged. Just saying, all this fuss over some paperwork. This fuss is about maintaining order. Kincaid cut him off. Something you'd understand if you'd been here longer than 5 minutes. Red entered, stopping short when he saw Kincaid. He turned to leave, but Kincaid called after him. Harlan, got something to say? Red slowly turned back. No, sir. Heard you went easy on C-Wing during the search. I followed protocol, Red replied stiffly. Protocol? Kincaid snorted. Tell me, does protocol include letting Jefferson keep contraband because he asked nicely? Red's face flushed. I didn't find anything because there wasn't anything to find. Or you didn't look hard enough. Kincaid stepped closer. Whose side are you on, Harlan? The room fell silent. Red glanced around at his fellow officers, saw the same question in their eyes. I'm just doing my job, Red said finally. Sir. Lieutenant Avery sat in her car in the Walmart parking lot 10 miles from Coldwater, watching a slender woman approach. Clarissa Bell wore the pressed slacks and tailored blazer of a professional journalist, looking out of place among the shoppers. Lieutenant Avery? Bell extended her hand. Thank you for contacting me. Avery didn't shake it. I haven't decided if I'm talking to you yet. Bell nodded, dropping her hand. Fair enough. What do you want to know? Your reputation, your protection, of sources. I've been with the Memphis Register for 11 years, covered corrections issues for 8, never revealed a source, even when subpoenaed. Bell's gaze was direct. And if you're sitting here, you already know that. Avery glanced at her watch. I have 10 minutes. Here's what you need to understand. Coldwater isn't just another private prison. It's a testing ground for compliance techniques that maximize profit by minimizing proper supervision and medical care. They target inmates by race, unofficial policy but consistent practice. Bell took out a recorder. May I? Avery nodded. There's an inmate, Darius Lattimore. He's been documenting abuses for years. Recently, he was severely beaten by a senior guard after making contact with the DOJ. The administration is in damage control mode, but there's more happening than a single incident. You're taking a significant risk, Bell observed. Someone has to, Avery replied. But here's my condition. Nothing gets published until the DOJ inspection is complete. If this breaks too soon, evidence will disappear and inmates will suffer the consequences. Bell considered this. I can hold the story, but I need something concrete to justify the weight to my editor. Avery hesitated, then pulled a flash drive from her pocket. Guard logs, incident reports, medical records showing patterns of injury during compliance interventions, and security camera blind spots, conveniently placed in areas where most serious incidents occur. Bell took the drive carefully. This is enough to start. I'll need more. You'll have it, Avery promised, starting her car. But remember, nothing publishes until I give the word. The East Block common area fell silent as Kincaid entered for evening count. Day sat at a table helping another inmate with legal forms. Their eyes met across the room, a moment of silent acknowledgement. Welfare check, Lattimore, Kincaid announced, motioning Day to follow him into the corridor. Once alone, Kincaid's facade dropped. The shakedown was just the beginning. I'll tear this place apart until I find those files. Day studied him calmly. There's nothing to find, Sergeant. Bullshit. The DOJ letter is already sent, Day finished, along with copies of everything I've documented for 5 years. You're looking for something that's already beyond these walls. Kincaid's hand twitched toward his baton. You think you've won something? This is my house. I can make your life hell. You already did, Day replied evenly. That was your mistake. I've broken harder men than you. Maybe. Day's voice remained measured. But I'm not alone anymore. As if on cue, a sound began to rise from the cells. A rhythmic tapping against metal, starting with one inmate, then 2, then dozens. The message spread through the block like wildfire, a percussive reminder of collective resistance. Kincaid's face paled slightly. This ends now. No, Day said quietly. This is just beginning. In the yard, an unusual formation had taken shape. Skinner and his white supremacist crew stood in perfect rows, hands behind their backs, eyes forward, a display of militant discipline directly in guards' sightlines. "The hell are they doing?" Mosley muttered to Kincaid as they watched from the tower. "Showing whose side they're on," Kincaid replied grimly. Below, Skinner caught his eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of support but also a reminder. Their arrangement had always been one of mutual benefit. If Kincaid's position weakened, so would that arrangement. Across the yard, Day sat with Prophet, both men observing the display with calculated interest. "They're hedging their bets," Prophet noted. Day nodded. "Skinner knows something's coming. He's positioning himself as the administration's ally. Dangerous game." "For everyone," Day agreed. By dinner, word had spread through every block. East Block had been targeted, and Day Lattimore was still standing. The message was clear. Resistance was possible. Even non-affiliated inmates had begun watching Day, looking to him as a symbol of defiance. When lockdown came that night, something unprecedented happened. As cell doors slammed shut throughout Coldwater, a chant began, first in East Block, then spreading to C and D blocks. "Day, day, day." The sound swelled, inmates pounding on walls and doors in unified rhythm. Guards scrambled, shouting for silence, threatening privileges, but the chant only grew louder. In his office, Warden Munsley listened to the chaos through the crackling radio, his face grim. "Shut it down," he ordered. "Full lockdown protocol. No privileges, no commissary, no visitation until further notice." Kincaid stood by the window watching lights flash as additional security measures activated across the compound. The chanting continued, undeterred. "This is your mess," Munsley said coldly. "Fix it, whatever it takes." Alone in his cell, Day listened to the voices calling his name, not in celebration of him but in recognition of what he represented. Possibility. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, preparing for what would come next. The pressure was building. Coldwater was a vessel that could no longer contain what was growing inside it, and Kincaid was a man running out of options. The alarm blared at 2:17 a.m., piercing the darkness of Coldwater with its shrill warning. Guards scrambled from their posts, shouting into radios as emergency protocols activated. Possible escape. Attempt east perimeter. All available officers respond. Kincaid, 3 hours into his night shift, sprinted toward the fence line where spotlights carved harsh white circles on the ground. When he arrived, Captain Mosley was already surveying a section of fence where the razor wire had been disturbed. "Found bolt cutters by the woodshop," Mosley reported. "Head count?" "In progress," Kincaid replied, scanning the darkness beyond the fence. "Any visual on suspects?" "Negative, but this was coordinated. Had to be." Within an hour, the entire facility was locked down. Every inmate confined to their cell, all programs suspended, all movement halted. In the administration building, Warden Munsley convened an emergency response team. "Effective immediately, Coldwater enters Level 5 security protocol," he announced to the assembled officers. "No communication between blocks, no visitation, no privileges, meals delivered to cells, complete isolation until we determine the full extent of this plot." Kincaid stood at the back of the room, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Sir, our intelligence suggests Lattimore's network orchestrated this." Munsley nodded. "Then we isolate the head from the body. Lattimore goes to administrative segregation. No contact, no materials, not even a Bible." A thin smile spread across Kincaid's face. Finally, authorization to break Day using the most powerful weapon in corrections. Isolation. Day's new accommodations were 8 by 10 feet of concrete and steel. No window. A fluorescent light that never turned off. A steel toilet sink combination. A thin mattress on a concrete slab. The isolation cell was designed for one purpose: to break the human spirit. "Special housing for special inmates," Kincaid said, watching Day survey the cell. "Enjoy the peace and quiet." "Thank you for the accommodation," Day replied evenly. Kincaid's smile faltered at Day's composure. 23 hours a day in here. 1 hour recreation. Alone. No books, no paper, no pencils. I understand. Do you? Because here's what happens in isolation, Lattimore. First comes boredom, then disorientation, then the mind starts to crack. I've seen strong men reduced to babbling in days. Day sat on the edge of the concrete bed. Is there anything else, Sergeant? Kincaid slammed the door shut, the hollow metal clang reverberating through the segregation unit. Through the small window, he watched Day settle into a meditative pose, eyes closed, breathing steady. The calm infuriated him. Where was the fear, the desperation? Psych eval every 12 hours, Kincaid instructed the unit officer. I want to know the moment he starts to break. Prophet was placed in solitary on the opposite end of the segregation unit, officially for inciting unrest through religious assembly. As the oldest inmate at Coldwater, he should have been exempt from punitive isolation, but regulations were flexible when convenient. When his breakfast tray arrived the next morning, Prophet looked at the powdered eggs and stale toast, then slid the tray back untouched. Not hungry, old-timer? Asked the guard. Fasting, Prophet replied, for clarity. By lunchtime, word had spread through the segregation unit that Prophet Briggs was refusing food. By dinner, 7 other inmates had joined him. Red found himself assigned to Day's cell block for the midnight shift, a posting he suspected wasn't coincidental. At 2 a.m., Captain Mosley approached him, holding a small plastic bag containing a crude shank fashioned from metal. Need you to do something, Mosley said quietly. Routine search of Lattimore's old cell. Find this under the mattress. Red stared at the weapon. Sir? It's simple, Harlan. You find this, we document it, and Lattimore stays in segregation indefinitely. Problem solved. But that's... Red stopped himself. That's what? Mosley challenged. Red swallowed hard. That's planting evidence, sir. That's protecting this institution, Mosley countered. You're either with us or against us. Make your choice. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Red thought of his father's pride when he'd accepted the corrections job, thought of his 3 years at Coldwater, the camaraderie among officers. Then he thought of Day's beaten body in the chapel corridor, of Kincaid's rage, of the system he'd once believed in. I can't do that, sir, Red said finally. Mosley's expression hardened. Then turn in your badge. You're suspended pending investigation for insubordination. Yes, sir, Red replied, removing his badge with shaking hands. As he walked toward the administration building, a strange sense of lightness came over him, as if by losing everything, he'd somehow found something essential. In her apartment 10 miles from Coldwater, Thunder Avery poured a glass of whiskey and turned on the local news. The lead story made her sit up straight. Breaking tonight, the anchor announced, allegations of systematic abuse at the Coldwater Correctional Facility. Sources claim a culture of violence specifically targeting African American inmates has gone unchecked for years. The Department of Justice has reportedly opened an investigation. Clarissa Bell appeared on screen, standing outside Coldwater's gates. While prison officials deny any pattern of abuse, documents obtained by the Register show a troubling correlation between race and disciplinary actions. A spokesperson for Correctional Service Partners, the private company operating Coldwater, declined our request for comment. Avery's phone rang. Warden Munsley's name flashed on the screen. She let it go to voicemail. Kincaid paced outside, Day's isolation cell, periodically checking through the window. For 3 days, Day had maintained the same routine. Meditation, calisthenic exercises, more meditation. No signs of cracking. No outbursts. Nothing. Has he spoken? Kincaid demanded, of the unit officer. Only to say thank you when meals are delivered, the officer replied, which he doesn't eat, by the way, joined the hunger strike. Kincaid pressed his face to the window. Day sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed. Open it, Kincaid ordered. Inside the cell, the artificial light cast harsh shadows that emphasized the hollows in Day's cheeks, evidence of his fast. He opened his eyes as Kincaid entered but didn't rise. "You think starving yourself accomplishes anything?" Kincaid asked. "Gandhi freed a nation through nonviolent resistance," Day replied calmly. "The body can survive without food. The spirit can't survive without purpose." "Very philosophical. How's this for philosophy? Your little rebellion is finished. Your friends are isolated. Your paperwork is gone. Your outside contact is cut." Day studied Kincaid's face, the bloodshot eyes, the nervous tick in his jaw, the sheen of sweat on his forehead. "You look tired, Sergeant," Day observed. "Don't worry about me." "You're not sleeping," Day continued. "The guilt is getting to you, the fear." "Shut up," Kincaid snapped. "You know what's happening outside these walls now. The story's breaking. The system you serve is preparing to sacrifice you." Kincaid stepped closer, fists clenched. "I said, shut up." "I forgive you," Day said softly. The words hit Kincaid like a physical blow. He stumbled back, disoriented by the unexpected response. "What did you say?" "I forgive you," Day repeated. "Not for my sake, for yours." Kincaid fled the cell, slamming the door behind him. His heart hammered in his chest as he leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. "I forgive you." Who the hell was Lattimore to forgive him? The presumption was infuriating. Yet the words had pierced something deep inside Kincaid, touching a part of him he'd walled off years ago. As he walked away, he could have sworn he heard Day's voice following him. "I forgive you. I forgive you." But when he turned back, the isolation cell was silent, the small window showing only Day, eyes closed once more, at peace in his concrete box. In the administrative wing, Officer Wilson was delivering mail when he witnessed something unusual. Skinner, who should have been in lockdown with all other inmates, being escorted into Warden Munsley's office by Captain Mosley. No restraints. No standard protocol. Wilson hesitated by the door, listening. "My people are ready," Skinner was saying. "When the time comes, we'll demonstrate proper compliance. Show the DOJ that the responsible inmates support Coldwater's administration." "And in return?" Munsley's voice asked. "We discussed terms already. Expanded privileges, preferential housing, protection." Wilson backed away quietly, mind racing. The administration was making deals with white supremacists while black inmates sat in isolation. The realization turned his stomach. He wasn't the only one disturbed by developments. Throughout Coldwater, guards who had once executed orders, without question, began to hesitate. The hunger strike had expanded beyond segregation, beyond racial lines. Latino inmates from C Block had joined. Even some white inmates, those not aligned with Skinner, had refused meals. Red sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone. After 3 days of suspension, isolation had begun to wear on him. His father wasn't speaking to him. His girlfriend didn't understand why he'd risked his job. But the weight on his conscience had lightened. A text message appeared from a number he didn't recognize. "If you're ready to tell the truth, call this number." Avery Red's hand trembled as he dialed. "Hello?" Clarissa Bell's voice answered. "This is Officer Harlan," Red said. "I was there when Sergeant Kincaid beat Darius Lattimore. I want to make a statement. Day lost track of time in isolation, an intentional effect of the environment. He estimated he'd been there 5 days, maybe 6. The hunger had become a background sensation, no longer demanding attention. His mind had found a clarity that transcended physical discomfort. When the door opened unexpectedly, Day opened his eyes to find not Kincaid but Warden Munsley, impeccably dressed as always, flanked by 2 officers. "Mr. Lattimore," Munsley began with forced cordiality. "I think we've had a misunderstanding." Day said nothing, waiting. "Your administrative segregation was a precautionary measure during our investigation of the escape attempt. That investigation has concluded." Munsley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You'll be returned to general population effective immediately. The abrupt reversal was suspicious. Day studied the warden's face, noting the tightness around his mouth, the controlled panic in his eyes. Something's changed, Day observed. Munsley's facade slipped momentarily. The Department of Justice has scheduled an inspection, tomorrow. You and I both want Coldwater to present its best face, don't we? I want the truth to be seen, Day replied. The hunger strike ends now, Munsley said, dropping all pretense. You'll communicate this to your people, or things will become very uncomfortable for everyone concerned. Day rose slowly, legs unsteady, after days of fasting. I have no control over others' choices, Warden. But you have influence, use it. Munsley turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. When the DOJ representatives arrive, remember that anything you say affects not just the administration, but every inmate at Coldwater. Push too hard and everyone suffers. As Day was escorted back toward general population, he glimpsed Prophet being similarly released from isolation. The old man caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The DOJ was coming. Coldwater couldn't hide anymore, and neither could Kincaid. 2 black government SUVs pulled through Coldwater's main gate at precisely 9:01 a.m. From the administration building window, Warden Munsley watched their arrival, jaw tight, fingers drumming anxiously on the sill. He'd been up since 4:30, overseeing a frantic facility-wide cleaning, hastily transferring problem inmates to other units and coaching staff on appropriate responses to federal questions. Remember? He addressed the assembled senior officers in the conference room minutes earlier. We are cooperative but concise. No elaboration, no speculation. Stick to official records. His gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. And where is Sergeant Kincaid? Called in sick, sir, Captain Mosley reported. Stomach flu. How convenient, Munsley replied, not bothering to hide his skepticism. Ensure he remains unavailable throughout this inspection. Doctor's orders. Now, straightening his tie, Munsley practiced his welcoming smile in the window's reflection before heading to the entrance. The DOJ team consisted of 4 people: Clara Whitman, lead investigator, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked hair, Marcus Jeffries, civil rights attorney, Dr. Sarah Cohen, prison health specialist, and David Ortiz, corrections consultant. Their credentials and federal authority granted them unrestricted access to any part of the facility. Welcome to Coldwater, Munsley greeted them in the lobby, hand extended. We're fully prepared to accommodate your review. Whitman's handshake was brief, her expression unimpressed. We'll need immediate access to your incident reports for the past 6 months, medical logs, and disciplinary records. Of course, we've prepared a conference room. We'll also require private interviews with specific inmates, Whitman continued, consulting her tablet, beginning with Darius Lattimore. Munsley's smile tightened. Certainly, though I should mention Lattimore has a history of making unsubstantiated claims. We'll form our own assessments, Warden, Jeffries interjected. Is there somewhere private we can speak with him? Day sat across from Whitman and Jeffries in the attorney visitation room, aware of the guard stationed just outside the glass door, watching intently. He'd been given clean clothes for the occasion, his usual work uniform exchanged for a newer one without stains. Mr. Lattimore, Whitman began, we've reviewed your correspondence with Assistant U.S. Attorney Rivera. Your allegations are serious. What I need now is concrete evidence. Day nodded, then slowly reached into his mouth, wincing slightly as he extracted something from alongside his back molar. He placed a tiny object, no larger than a pencil eraser, on the table. What is this? Jeffries asked, leaning forward. Micro SD card, Day explained. Contains everything. 5 years of documentation. Dates, times, officers involved, medical reports, photographic evidence where possible. Witness statements. You kept this in your mouth? Whitman asked, surprised. Only place they couldn't search, Day replied. Changed hiding spots regularly. Prophet Nathaniel Briggs kept duplicates. Jeffries carefully placed the SD card in an evidence bag. This is significant, Mr. Lattimore, but we'll need your testimony as well. I'm prepared to provide it, Day said, leaning forward slightly. But I need assurances for others. The men who've helped me, They need protection. We can't make guarantees, but then I can't guarantee their continued safety either. Day interrupted, his usual calm demeanor intensifying. Once you leave today, we're still here, surrounded by the same guards, the same system. Whitman studied him thoughtfully. You've taken extraordinary risks to document these abuses. Why? Day's eyes met hers directly. Because someone had to. Because the truth matters even when it's inconvenient. Especially then. Outside the visitation room, Lieutenant Avery intercepted Dr. Cohen as she prepared to inspect the medical facilities. Dr. Cohen? A moment, please, Avery said quietly, guiding the woman to a less monitored corridor. There's something you should see. Avery slipped a folder from inside her uniform jacket. The unredacted medical report from Darius Lattimore's beating. The one submitted to administration differs significantly. Cohen opened the folder, eyes widening as she scanned the contents. This describes assault-level trauma. The official report mentioned minor injuries from a restraint incident. The attending nurse was pressured to modify her assessment, Avery explained. She'll verify this if given protection from retaliation. Lieutenant, you understand you're potentially jeopardizing your career? I'm aware, Avery replied steadily. But some things matter more. In the staff locker room, Red Harlan emptied his personal items into a cardboard box, his suspension now public knowledge. As he closed his locker for what might be the last time, Captain Mosley entered. Harlan, Warden wants to see you. Red followed Mosley to the administrative offices where, to his surprise, he found not just Munsley but Lieutenant Avery and the DOJ investigator Whitman waiting. Officer Harlan, Munsley began with forced cordiality. In light of recent misunderstandings, we're prepared to reinstate you effective immediately. Your dedication to Coldwater is valued and we— What the warden means, Avery interrupted, is that they'd prefer you not speak to the Department of Justice representatives about what you witnessed in the chapel corridor. Munsley's smile vanished. Lieutenant Avery is overstepping. I saw Sergeant Kincaid beat Day Lattimore without provocation, Red stated flatly, addressing Whitman directly. It wasn't restraint, it was punishment, and I falsified my report about it afterward. The room fell silent. Red felt a weight lifting from his shoulders with each word. I want to make a formal statement, he continued, but I need assurance I won't face retaliation. Whitman nodded. We can arrange that, Officer Harlan. Munsley's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. Harlan is a disgruntled employee facing disciplinary action for refusing to plant evidence, Red countered, finding strength he didn't know he possessed. Captain Mosley ordered me to place a weapon in Lattimore's cell to justify extended segregation. I have text messages confirming the order. Munsley stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Actually, Whitman replied calmly, it's just beginning. Lunch in the cafeteria was tense as inmates watched the DOJ team move through the space, occasionally stopping to speak with selected prisoners. Guards stood along the perimeter, postures rigid, eyes constantly scanning for trouble. In the center of the cafeteria, Prophet rose from his table, his metal tray clattering to the floor. The sudden noise drew all eyes to him. Brothers, called out his old voice carrying surprising strength. Today we have witnesses. Today we are seen. Guards moved toward him but hesitated when Jeffries from the DOJ team approached. Let him speak, Jeffries instructed. Prophet surveyed the room, meeting the eyes of inmates from every block. For years, we've lived under a system that treats some lives as worth less than others. That punishes skin color as if it were a crime. His gaze shifted to the DOJ team. Today, the outside world looks in. Today, our voices might finally be heard. Across the cafeteria, Skinner stood with his crew whispering instructions. Suddenly, one of his lieutenants shoved a black inmate from behind, sending him stumbling into a table. Watch where you're going, the white inmate shouted, loud enough for all to hear. The black inmate turned, fists clenched, but Mac was faster, stepping between them. Not now, Mac said firmly. Not today. For a tense moment, violence hung in the air like an electrical charge. DOJ representatives watched, documenting every interaction. Guards reached for their radios, prepared to call for backup. They want us to fight. Day's voice cut through the tension as he stood. They want to show these investigators that we're animals who need to be controlled. His eyes found Skinner's across the room. But we are not what they say we are. And today we prove it. The black inmate unclenched his fists. Mac guided him back to his table. The moment passed. Prophet continued. Coldwater was built to break us, to make us forget our humanity. But they failed. His voice rose. Look around. See your brothers. Remember who you are. Remember who we are together. The cafeteria had fallen completely silent. Inmates and staff alike transfixed by the old man's words. Whatever happens after today, Prophet concluded, remember this moment. Truth has entered these walls, and truth once spoken cannot be unspoken. As he sat down, something unprecedented happened. Throughout the cafeteria, inmates, black, white, Latino, tapped their fingers on tables in unified rhythm. Not a chant, not a shout, but a pulse. A heartbeat. By late afternoon, the DOJ team had gathered in the conference room to consolidate their findings. Outside, Warden Munsley paced anxiously, occasionally glancing through the window at the documents spread. Across the table, when they finally emerged, Whitman's expression gave nothing away. Warden Munsley, based on our preliminary investigation, we're prepared to issue initial directives requiring immediate implementation. Munsley straightened his posture. We'll take your recommendations under advisement. These aren't recommendations, Jeffries clarified. These are federal directives, effective immediately. Whitman handed Munsley a document. Coldwater will immediately end extended isolation practices. All inmates currently in segregation for non-violent offenses are to be returned to general population. Medical staff will operate independently from security staff, and all officers implicated in abuse allegations, including Sergeant Kincaid, are to be placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Munsley's face reddened. This is an overreach of... Additionally, Whitman continued, we're establishing an ongoing presence at Coldwater. 2 federal monitors will remain on site for at least 30 days. Impossible, Munsley sputtered. Necessary, Whitman countered. Our full report will be issued within 2 weeks. The U.S. Attorney's Office will determine whether criminal charges are warranted. You can't possibly believe the word of convicted criminals over. We believe evidence, Warden, Dr. Cohen interjected, holding up the medical reports Avery had provided, and the evidence is quite compelling. As the DOJ team prepared to depart, Day watched from the yard, standing alongside Prophet and Mac. The federal visitors had spoken with dozens of inmates, collected statements, examined records, and promised action. You think anything will really change? Mac asked skeptically. Something already has, Prophet replied. The silence is broken. Day nodded thoughtfully. It's a beginning, not an end. They watched as the black SUVs pulled away, taking with them evidence, testimony, and promises. But Day knew better than to trust promises alone. The system would resist change, would fight back. Across the yard, he noticed Kincaid had returned, standing in the guard tower, watching him with undisguised hatred. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement that this battle was far from over. As if reading his thoughts, Prophet placed a weathered hand on Day's shoulder. They'll retaliate, the old man warned. When the outsiders leave, they'll try to reassert control. Let them try, Day replied quietly. The yard buzzer sounded, signaling the end of recreation time. As inmates began moving toward their blocks, Mac hung back. Brothers are ready, he said to Day. Whatever comes next. Day looked around at the prison that had been his home for 5 years. The concrete and steel designed to break spirits and crush resistance. For the first time, he saw it clearly for what it was. Not an immovable force, but a fragile system dependent on fear and silence. And neither fear nor silence held power over him anymore. 3 days after the DOJ visit, The promised federal monitors had yet to arrive. The administration cited logistical delays and procedural requirements. In their absence, Coldwater reverted to form, like a body expelling a foreign presence. It began subtly. Inmates who had spoken to DOJ representatives found themselves reassigned to different work details, separated from their support networks. The library was suddenly closed for inventory. Mail deliveries slowed to a trickle, with many letters, mysteriously lost in processing. Day noticed the pattern immediately. From his position in the laundry room, he tracked the systematic isolation of key witnesses through messages smuggled between blocks. "They're picking us off one by one," Mac observed, keeping his voice low as he folded sheets beside Day. "Williams got transferred to Parchman this morning. Rodriguez is in medical isolation for a TB screening. Even Prophet's been moved to D block." Before Day could respond, the laundry room door swung open. Kincaid stood there, reinstated to duty. Despite the DOJ directives, his eyes bloodshot but triumphant. "Lattimore, special assignment." Day recognized the familiar pretext, the isolated task that provided opportunity for correction without witnesses. He'd expected this, had prepared himself mentally. "Yes, sir," he replied, setting down his work and following Kincaid into the corridor. Instead of leading him to a blind spot, however, Kincaid directed him to Warden Munsley's office, where Munsley sat behind his desk, reviewing documents with Captain Mosley. "Here he is," Kincaid announced, closing the door behind them. Munsley looked up, his expression controlled but eyes burning with quiet rage. "Mr. Lattimore, I hoped we might have a candid conversation about recent events." Day remained silent, standing at regulation posture. "Your DOJ friends," Munsley continued, "made quite an impression. Issued their directives, made their threats, then departed, leaving us to maintain order in a facility now seething with misplaced expectations." He stood, circling the desk to stand before Day. "Let me be clear about what happens next. The Department of Justice may eventually implement changes here. There may even be reassignments or reprimands, but that process will take months, possibly years." Munsley's voice hardened. "In the meantime, Coldwater remains under my authority, and while your outside support has temporarily departed, we are very much still here." "Yes, sir," Day replied evenly. "So am I." Something in Day's calm composure made Munsley's eye twitch slightly. "Several inmates involved in organizing unrest are being transferred to other facilities. For their own protection, of course. Your name is on that list." The threat was clear. Separation from the network he'd built, from the evidence he'd gathered, from the protection of numbers. "However," Munsley continued, "I'm prepared to reconsider, provided you demonstrate leadership in the right direction. A statement from you, encouraging compliance, discouraging further complaints, would significantly improve facility morale." Day met Munsley's gaze directly. "I can't do that, sir." "Can't or won't?" "Both," Day replied. "The truth doesn't become untrue because it's inconvenient." Munsley's facade of reasonableness cracked. "You've made your choice, then?" He nodded. To Kincaid. "Transfer paperwork will be processed tomorrow. Until then, Sergeant Kincaid will ensure your final hours at Coldwater are educational." Mac was returned to his cell after 3 days in preventive isolation, his face bruised, arm cradled protectively around his rib cage. Prophet, recently reassigned to the adjacent cell, watched through the bars as Mac collapsed onto his bunk. "Medical?" Prophet asked quietly. "Said I fell down the stairs," Mac winced. "Ribs are definitely broken." Prophet passed a damp cloth through the bars. "They're getting desperate." "Desperate is dangerous," Mac replied, pressing the cloth to his swollen lip. "They beat Thomas unconscious for having one of Day's papers. Jenkins disappeared completely. They're saying he got transferred, but nobody saw him leave." Down the corridor, a guard called out, "Lights out in 10. Prophet leaned closer to the bars. "It's coming at dawn," he whispered. "Tell everyone to be ready." "What's coming?" The old man's eyes held a strange light. Judgment. In the darkness of his apartment, Kincaid sat unmoving, a half-empty whiskey bottle on the table before him. The television played silently in the background, a local news program where his own name had appeared in the evening report, connected to allegations of abuse. His hand trembled as he poured another drink. Sleep had become impossible. His dreams, invaded by Day's calm eyes, by the words that wouldn't stop echoing. I forgive you. Forgiveness is weakness, son. Kincaid's head jerked up at the voice. His father, 17 years dead, stood in the kitchen doorway, dressed in his sheriff's uniform, contempt etched on his face. You let him get inside your head, the apparition continued. Let him undermine everything we built. He had no right, Kincaid mumbled, knowing he was hallucinating but unable to stop engaging. Coming in with his legal papers, his educated talk, looking at me like what? His father pressed. Like he could see through me, Kincaid whispered. Like he knew me. The ghost of Sheriff Kincaid approached, looming over the table. Then make him unsee. Remind him who holds the power. Kincaid closed his eyes, pressing the heels of his hands against his temples. When he opened them again, the apparition was gone. But the voice remained pulsing behind his eyes. Remind him, remind him, remind him. His phone vibrated on the table, a text from Captain Mosley, night duty tomorrow, Lattimore transfer prep, free reign. Kincaid stared at the message, a plan forming through the haze of whiskey and sleeplessness. One last lesson for Day Lattimore, one final reminder of the natural order before he disappeared into the system. Lant Avery sat in her parked car outside the federal courthouse in Jackson, rain pattering against the windshield. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as she gathered her courage. Inside her briefcase lay copies of death reports from Coldwater spanning the past 3 years. 15 inmates whose deaths had been classified as suicide, natural causes, or complications from pre-existing conditions. The report on Kevin Morris, who had died just yesterday, was particularly damning. Morris had been found hanging in his cell, officially ruled a suicide. But Avery had seen his body in the infirmary, noted the defensive wounds on his hands, the bruising patterns inconsistent with self-harm. Morris had been the first inmate to speak with DOJ investigators, providing detailed testimony about Coldwater's racial abuse patterns. His death was no coincidence, it was a message. Avery's phone rang, Clarissa Bell from the Memphis Register. They killed him, Avery said without preamble. Morris? Bell asked. We heard rumors, not rumors, fact. I have the medical evidence. Avery's voice shook slightly. And he won't be the last. They're systematically targeting every inmate who cooperated with the DOJ. What about federal protection, the monitors? Conveniently delayed. This is happening now, Clarissa, tonight. They're transferring Day Lattimore tomorrow, isolating the leadership before the DOJ can establish a presence. Bell was silent for a moment. What are you planning to do? Avery looked at the courthouse through the rain-streaked windshield. Go directly to the U.S. Attorney. These death reports constitute evidence of federal crimes. That's a point of no return, Carol. I passed that point the moment I saw Morris's body, Avery replied. Coldwater has to be stopped, whatever it costs me. Day sat on his bunk, methodically tearing a blank commissary request form into tiny squares. On each square, he carefully wrote the same message in miniature lettering. Morris murdered. Transfers tomorrow. DOJ evidence in jeopardy. Time critical. Each note was then tightly rolled and sealed with a paste made from toothpaste. By lights out, he had 20 identical capsules hidden in the seam of his mattress. When the night guard, not Kincaid thankfully, performed the hourly check, Day lay perfectly still, feigning sleep. As soon as the footsteps receded, he retrieved one capsule and placed it inside his cheek. The next morning, during breakfast, he would pass the messages through a network of handshakes and casual contacts, ensuring the information reached every block. His final act of resistance before the IHO planned transfer, Day closed his eyes, mentally preparing for what would likely be his last night at Coldwater. He harbored no illusions about what awaited him tomorrow. Kincaid's educational session would be brutal. The transfer, if it happened at all, would place him in even more dangerous circumstances, isolated from his support network. Yet a strange calm settled over him. 5 years of careful documentation of building networks, of surviving the system while exposing its flaws, it had led to this moment. Whatever happened to him personally, the truth had escaped Coldwater's walls. The DOJ had evidence. Journalists had the story. The system might protect itself through violence, but the narrative was no longer under its exclusive control. In the darkness, Day whispered Prophet's words like a mantra. Truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. At midnight, as the facility settled into its nighttime rhythm, Prophet knelt in his cell, hands clasped in prayer. His aged body, bent by years of imprisonment, seemed almost luminous in the dim light filtering through the bars. In the cell, beside him, Mac watched silently, struck by the old man's serenity. "You should rest," Mac said finally. "Ribs need time to heal." Prophet opened his eyes, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "Some battles aren't fought with the body, son." "What did you mean earlier? About Dawn?" Prophet rose slowly, joints cracking with the effort. "I've been in these walls 27 years. Seen 3 wardens, hundreds of guards, thousands of inmates. Seen riots put down, reforms promised, abuses continued." His voice grew distant. "But I've never seen what's coming tomorrow." "Which is what, exactly?" Mac pressed. "Revelation," Prophet replied. "The moment when all that's hidden comes to light." Mac studied the old man skeptically. "You're speaking in riddles, old-timer." "Because some truths can't be spoken directly," Prophet countered. "But I'll tell you this, I've spent my life watching for signs. 3 days ago I recognized one." "The DOJ visit?" Prophet shook his head. "Officer Harlan." "Red? What about him?" "He disappeared after testifying," Prophet said quietly. "But not because Coldwater silenced him, because he found his conscience and his courage." The old man's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "One crack in the wall is all it takes, if it's in the right place." Mac started to respond, but Prophet raised a hand, head tilted as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "It's time to rest now," the old man said. "Tomorrow will demand everything we have." As Prophet returned to his knees in prayer, Mac felt a chill pass through him, not of fear but of anticipation. Whatever was coming at dawn, Prophet had already surrendered to it, and somehow, that was more terrifying than any threat Coldwater could devise. In Warden Munsley's darkened office, the phone rang shortly after 2 a.m. His voice was thick with interrupted sleep when he answered. "This is Warden Munsley." "Sir, this is the front gate. There's a situation you should know about." "What kind of situation?" "There's media outside the gates, 3 news vans, and—" The guard hesitated. "And what?" Munsley demanded. "Federal." "Marshals, sir, they're saying they have warrants." Dawn broke over Coldwater in shades of crimson and gold. The facility should have been stirring with morning routines, count, breakfast prep, shift changes. Instead, an unnatural stillness had settled over the prison. In the administration building, Warden Munsley stood at his window, watching federal marshals establish a perimeter at the main gate while news crews set up cameras. "How did they get warrants so quickly?" Captain Mosley asked, his usual confidence evaporated. "Someone fed them information," Munsley replied tightly. "Someone with access to our internal records." His phone buzzed with an urgent message. East. Block refusing to exit cells for count. D block following suit. As he read it, another alert followed. C block inmates sitting silently on floors. Won't respond to orders. Then another. Kitchen staff reporting multiple officers called in sick. Breakfast operations compromised. Coldwater was seizing up like a machine without oil, systems failing in cascading sequence. "Sir," Mosley ventured, "what are your orders?" Munsley's jaw tightened. "Establish control, whatever it takes." Day awoke to unusual silence. No guards shouting for morning count. No rattling food carts, just the eerie quiet of collective defiance. His messages had spread overnight faster than he'd anticipated. Morris's murder had been the final catalyst, proof that cooperation with authorities could be fatal, but also evidence that the administration was desperate. When his cell door remained locked past the usual count time, Day knew the silent protest was working. He sat cross-legged on his bunk, waiting. The emergency keys rattled in his lock just after 6 a.m. Kincaid stood there alone, baton in hand. "Transfer prep," he announced flatly. "Against the wall, Lattimore." Day complied, facing the concrete as Kincaid entered the cell, closing the door behind him. "Hands," Kincaid ordered. Day extended his wrists for cuffing, but Kincaid made no move to restrain him. Instead, the sergeant stood there, breathing heavily, baton tapping against his leg. "You think you've won something?" Kincaid said finally. Day remained silent, still facing the wall. "Turn around," Kincaid commanded. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Day turned slowly. Kincaid looked terrible, unshaven, uniform rumpled, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep or too much alcohol, possibly both. 5 years, Kincaid continued. 5 years you've been planning this, using my prison to build your case, using me. Not using, Day corrected quietly. Documenting. There's a difference. Kincaid stepped closer. "You let me beat you. You wanted it to happen." "No," Day replied. "I never wanted violence, but I was prepared for it. There's a difference there, too." Something in Kincaid's expression cracked, a hairline fracture in his certainty. "Do you know what happens to me if those federal charges stick? My pension, my freedom, everything." "Do you know what happens to men in here every day?" Day countered. "Their dignity, their humanity, everything." Kincaid raised his baton suddenly, the movement jerky, uncoordinated. Day didn't flinch. "You still afraid of me, Lattimore?" "I was never afraid of you, Sergeant," Day replied evenly. "I was afraid of what you represent." The baton trembled in Kincaid's hand. For a moment, violence hung in the air between them, the familiar solution to every problem Kincaid had ever faced. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. "I can't fix what I did to you," Kincaid said, voice barely audible. "No," Day agreed. "You can't." Kincaid stared at him a moment longer, then tossed his baton onto the bunk. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving the cell door open behind him. Throughout Coldwater, a coordinated protest had transformed the prison's rigid routine into an eerie tableau of resistance. In every block, inmates sat silently on the floors of their cells or common areas, hands open on their knees, eyes forward. No chants, no violence, no demands shouted through bars, just silence, unified, disciplined silence. Guards found themselves giving orders that evaporated into emptiness. Some responded with threats, with punitive measures, water shut off, privileges revoked. Others stood uncertainly, radios crackling with contradictory commands from increasingly desperate supervisors. In the main corridor, a young guard named Wilson faced 40 seated inmates with a riot shield and pepper spray. His hand shook as he raised the canister. "Return to your cells immediately," he shouted. "This is your final warning." Not a single inmate moved. They remained seated, palms open, eyes forward, the posture Prophet had demonstrated in the chapel days earlier. Wilson's finger tensed on the trigger. "Don't." The voice came from behind him. Wilson turned to find Red Harlan standing there, dressed not in a guard's uniform but in civilian clothes, a press credential around his neck. "Officer Harlan, what are you—" "It's just Red now," he interrupted, stepping forward. "And you don't want to do this, trust me." "They're disobeying direct orders," Wilson protested. "They're exercising the only power they have," Red countered. "Look at them. Really look." Wilson hesitated, seeing the inmates clearly for perhaps the first time, not as threats or numbers but as men engaged in disciplined, principled resistance. I have orders, Wilson said, but the conviction had left his voice. Red nodded toward a camera crew that had followed him into the corridor. And now you have witnesses. Wilson lowered the pepper spray. Lieutenant Avery strode through the administration building flanked by federal marshals and DOJ officials, her posture straight, her purpose unwavering. Staff scattered before their advance, years of unquestioned authority, dissolved in the face of federal badges and warrants. They found Munsley in the conference room with his senior staff, frantically shredding documents. Warden Harold Munsley, Avery announced from the doorway. Federal marshals are here to serve warrants related to civil rights violations, tampering with evidence, and conspiracy charges in the death of inmate Kevin Morris. Munsley froze, shredder, whining as it jammed on too many pages. This is a gross overreach of federal authority. We are handling an ongoing security situation. The only situation you're handling, interrupted U.S. Attorney Rivera, stepping forward, is your arrest and processing. Coldwater Correctional Facility is hereby placed under federal receivership, pending complete investigation. As marshals moved to secure Munsley and the other administrators, Avery felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The burden of complicity she'd carried for 17 months finally set down. In the central guard room, Red connected a small device to the facility's main monitor. The room had been secured by federal officers and now prison staff, DOJ officials, and select members of the press gathered to witness what he'd brought. What you're about to see, Red explained, was recorded on a personal body cam I purchased after witnessing Sergeant Kincaid's assault on Darius Lattimore. I've been documenting conditions and incidents at Coldwater for the past 2 weeks. The screen flickered to life, showing Kincaid and Captain Mosley in the staff locker room. Lattimore's got the DOJ sniffing around, Mosley was saying. Warden wants it contained. I'll handle him, Kincaid replied, like we handled Williams last year. No medical reports this time, Mosley warned. Nothing traceable. The footage continued. Damning conversations, evidence of orchestrated abuse, explicit discussions of racial targeting. Red had captured it all, creating an irrefutable record from within the system itself. When the video ended, the room remained silent, the evidence too overwhelming for immediate response. Rivera was the first to speak. Mr. Harlan, your testimony in this footage will be central to the federal case. You understand the risks you've taken? Red nodded. I understand them better than the risks of staying silent. By noon, federal authorities had established full control of Coldwater. As news helicopters circled overhead, inmates were returned to regular movement, the silent protest having achieved its purpose. The world was now watching. Day walked through the yard alongside Mac, both men observing the transformation around them. Guards replaced by federal officers, administrators, led away in handcuffs, medical teams evaluating inmates who had reported abuse. Still can't believe it worked, Mac said quietly. It worked because everyone played their part, Day replied. Your courage, Prophet's wisdom, Avery's evidence, Red's footage. And your planning, Mac added. 5 years of patience. Day shook his head. Justice shouldn't take 5 years. They paused as a medical team rushed past them toward D Block, where Prophet had remained throughout the morning's events. Is he sick? Day asked a passing federal officer. Not exactly, the officer replied. The old man hasn't moved or spoken since we arrived, just kneeling there praying. Day and Mac exchanged a glance, then followed quickly to Prophet's cell. They found him exactly as described, kneeling in prayer, eyes closed, serene amid chaos. Prophet, Day called softly, it's over, we did it. The old man didn't respond. A medical officer leaned in, checking his pulse, then looked up with solemn eyes. I'm sorry, she said quietly. He's gone. Max stepped back in shock. Gone? But he was just... Based on body temperature, he passed several hours ago. The medical officer explained. Probably around dawn. Day knelt beside Prophet's still form, noting the peaceful expression on his weathered face. The old man had known somehow, had seen the ending before it arrived. It's coming at dawn, Judgment. Prophet had witnessed the beginning of Coldwater's reckoning, then departed just as the system that had held him for 27 years began to crumble. Evening fell over Coldwater, the facility now under full federal supervision. In the yard, Day stood alone, watching the sunset paint the prison walls with golden light. The air felt different somehow, charged with possibility rather than oppression. He sensed someone approach and turned to find Red standing there, press credential still hanging around his neck. "Doesn't feel real," Red said, looking around, at the transformed prison. "It's real," Day assured him, "but it's just the beginning. The evidence is overwhelming. Munsley, Kincaid, Mosley, they'll face charges, probably prison time." Day nodded thoughtfully. "And then?" "What do you mean?" "What happens after the headlines fade, after the emergency response ends?" Day gestured toward the facility. "Coldwater is one prison. The system that created it remains." Red considered this. "So we keep fighting. We keep witnessing," Day corrected. "Keep documenting, keep speaking truth, even when no one seems to be listening." As twilight deepened around them, Day reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the brutal beating in the chapel corridor to this moment of fragile victory. So much lost, so much still to gain. Prophet knew this day would come, Day said quietly. "Not the details, but the essence. He used to tell me, truth is like fire in the walls. You can't see it at first, but once it catches, there's no stopping it." Red looked toward the administration building, where lights burned as federal teams continued gathering evidence. "What happens to you now?" he asked. Day shrugged. "Testimony. Eventually release, maybe. My case has grounds for review." "And Kincaid? I heard he walked away during the confrontation." "Some battles you win by fighting," Day replied. "Others, by refusing to fight on the enemy's terms." As darkness settled over Coldwater, the prison's floodlights activated automatically, casting harsh illumination over concrete and steel. But something fundamental had changed. The walls remained, but the power they represented had been revealed as more fragile than anyone had imagined. Day looked up at the stars becoming visible above the yard. The same stars visible to free men everywhere. For 5 years he had maintained his humanity in a place designed to strip it away, had held to truth when surrounded by systematic lies. The system didn't fall all at once, but the myth of its inevitability had cracked, and through that crack something new could grow. Truth once spoken could never be unspoken. Fire, once ignited, could never be contained. And Coldwater would never be the same again. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.